Corporate North America is driven by profit and output and finding that edge of the edge so that we can beat our competition. What we've seen in this corporate world over the last 80 to 100 years is that sometimes those profits come at the cost of our personal well-being. This is something that we often talk about on the podcast. How can we sustain effort? How can we continually find more meaning in our work? How can we live a good life alongside the work that we do? Those answers don't often come from obvious sources like Western medicine and psychiatry. We sometimes struggle with these things because it is often at odds with who we are as a person and what we want to do. What we enjoy doing is often at odds with, let's say, profit in the company or trying to make the company better and pushing through some of those difficult emotional experiences. We brought on a mind master in Indigenous ways of knowing and thinking and being. His name is Trent Fequet, and he is a master in this space because he's negotiated these two worlds, a world of growing up in a traditional Indigenous world and then becoming massively successful in a corporate world. And now his mission is to integrate some of his Indigenous ways of knowing and being and learning and working into his company, Steel River Group. And it's very inspirational. And I think we could learn a lot from mapping our workflows and what we do day to day onto some really important Indigenous ways of learning and being and teaching. And so that's what Trent is here to talk about. And I really enjoyed our conversation. Welcome to Beyond the Checkbox, Mind Masters. I'm Dr. Ryan Todd, a psychiatrist with over a decade of experience. And in this series with leading experts, we will explore the complexities of mental health, breakthrough therapies, and today's hottest topics. This is Beyond the Checkbox, Mind Masters. We talk a lot about how Indigenous ways of knowing, being, wellness are different without clarity on what the differences are. So walk us through that piece. Like what are some of the differences in the way that Indigenous peoples think about wellness and mental health that might be different from, non-Indigenous peoples?
Yeah, it's a good question, Ryan. For me, I speak as far as my upbringing, and I'm a Inuk man, so I don't speak on behalf of all Indigenous people, but I can definitely speak through my learnings and my upbringing and my challenges and some of my successes. I think a lot of old cultures think around wellness the same. When you look inside of Canada, you look inside of Indigenous people. There's 4 ways of knowing. So for us, it's looking through the lens as a person, as an identity of an individual. We're made up of our physical well-being. We're made up of our mental strength and our emotional, and of course, our spiritual. But I think, is that different? I think most people, if you have the proper conversations, they lean into those pillars of being very important in their lives, just like it is in my life. For me personally, my gateway into wellness is my physical health. It's taking care of my body. Watching out what I eat, my nutrition, and that's always been my cornerstone. And if I can really focus on that, that's the first step of my identity and my being healthy and well. Spiritually, for me, it's being Indigenous and my upbringing, and my traditional upbringing. Also connected to, my religious beliefs and upbringing is very important. And that in itself allows me to stay at a balance and the core of looking outwards. And I believe emotional health is always a tricky one for all of us, right? Yeah. We can't control our emotions, can't control the emotions that come on. We only can control our behaviors. And I think that's a lifetime journey of being able to, of that self-control. And if there is such a thing as a silver bullet in happiness, and through my beliefs anyway, is having that control, having control of your emotions, having control of how you behave and how you interact with others in the world. And, the mental health part of it is just like your body. It's, focusing on to it and and ensuring that you're putting the effort towards your wellness and your mental strength.
The thing that I think is so interesting is that we often want to, as non-Indigenous people, say, this is Indigenous blank. This is how Indigenous people learn. This is how Indigenous people take care of their mental health. This is how, like, we just want like a conceptualization that is not nuanced and it's just simple and straightforward. But that doesn't exist in like any other culture, old culture, new culture. You know, like I'm from Saskatchewan. You can't say Saskatchewan people take care of their health like this, you know? So I wonder why that is. Like, why do we want to homogenize our considerations of how Indigenous people take care of their health or even their mental health? That's a thing, and it just doesn't exist.
It's interesting you bring it up that way. And it's, you know, and when you say that, do you look through the lens of that's a positive thing or is that a scary thing? I think a lot of people are very interested in Indigenous culture and Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous way of looking through different topics, whether it's mental health, whether it's health, whether it's environmental, so on and so forth. And it's not that scary. It's not that mystical. With that said, we do hold sacred our teachings. We hold sacred our way of knowing. And in a lot of ways, we feel very protective of those teachings and those learnings because we do see a lot of individuals and cultures approach things, from my personal lens anyway, and speaking on behalf of all Indigenous, not as typical in our world. So, you know, if you come inside of Canada and people see Indigenous people in Canada as the minority, as far as Indigenous people, we're looking out and seeing all these different cultures coming into our lands, and it's like, that's not necessarily how we would approach that. And I think there's a very interesting shift currently, and you see it consistently probably across Canada more so than currently, where there's a lot of interest in to understand how Indigenous people process and think and or process, you know, the things like mental health, and we don't see it as we're maybe lesser or we do it different. I think in a lot of ways we feel that we have teachings and tools that we wish others would have to be able to process some of these things and figure out one's identity. Because really it's all about understanding one's identity. And once you understand your identity, you're not as fearful of how you portray that identity. And I think a lot of trauma linked to what people should probably unlearn about Indigenous people and culture is that they see it through maybe the last X amount of years and the trauma and that's more focused on rather than pre any of those connections with and I think we feel almost like we have a superpower knowing kind of what we know in our teachings and our culture and being able to bring that forward for our own, as I mentioned, our identity. And when you see, I think anybody, not just Indigenous people in Canada, but anybody, if they're struggling because they're not connected to their identity. They've lost, they haven't found yet their personal identity, whatever that is unique to them.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. From like the folks that I've worked with as a psychiatrist, if you don't, even if you, it's the like, I don't want to say wrong identity, or even if it's a little bit of a mismatch and you're still working hard at like figuring out what it is, that's a core element of mental health, is who you think you are. And also how the world treats you, because those two things are, I think, very much linked. And if you don't really know who you are, or at least don't have a roadmap to figuring that out, those are some of the people that I think struggle the most. If you are struggling, and I talk like when you're thinking about gender issues, which is such a hot topic right now, if you're struggling to figure out what gender you are, or that's one of the most unmooring things, because you don't know which camp you're in and you're trying to figure that out. And there's a journey there to take. And that's really distressing for people. If you don't know what, your group of friends are and what you stand for and what your values are, like those are really distressing things for individuals to work through. And so one thing that I think has been really why I think there's such an interest in Indigenous ways of thinking of through the world in that lens is by and large because I don't think we're doing a great job of it. Like non-Indigenous people, it's not like we can say, oh, we're like so good at mapping our identities, understanding what we want out of life, connecting ourselves to our ancestors and where we came from. Like we don't do a great job of that. And I think we could learn so much from how Indigenous peoples have not just done that for a generation, but we're talking, time in memoriam.
Yeah, it's all great points. And then if you look through kind of the four ways of knowing, what you're leaning into there is the spiritual connection, where we feel there's a lot of opportunities for us to go back and learn our heritage and learn that connection with the land and learn the connection, that interconnectedness of what us with nature, and then in turn us with other cultures and as an individual with even inside the Indigenous space, for that matter, like the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit in itself it's very different. And being clumped underneath the Indigenous profile is something that, it's for our own identities to actually decouple away from that. I'm Inuit. I'm not First Nations. I have the luxury and the privilege to be working with First Nations and Métis and across Canada. And every time I go into a community, it's like a non-Indigenous person walking into community. Obviously, there's a base of understanding that I have, but I learn every day from the different cultures that I'm interacting with. Just like, a non-Indigenous person would have that opportunity to learn. I think for me, it's that level of respect and level of appreciation of the opportunity and learnings I'm getting from being involved into that space. But for me, it's the same as any other Indigenous or non-Indigenous person learning about this unique cultures and then how they look through things. For me, I've taken a lot of opportunities to speak with elders and knowledge keepers about leadership. I grew up traditional as far as early in my life, but it wasn't a lot of leadership as far as business. It was leadership as far as an individual, a man, and the techniques and what I needed to ensure that I could live with the land, on the land. But as I moved, into the business world, I took 15 years of decoupling myself away from that, to not even share that I was Indigenous for a big part of my career, because I was looked upon as a negative thing. And I didn't have the experience. If you're Indigenous, you can't be running these high-level projects. You would felt that I would be looked at as a lesser individual if I was Indigenous in some of those work environments. I lost my identity. I personally lost my identity in a big way. And about 12, 15 years ago, I had an event in my life where it gave me a reality check that, I can't be this eccentric person living this other life and these identities. I had to go back and figure out who I was. And through that, I was able then to, start my journey as an entrepreneur and found the confidence and courage to do that. 3 or 4 years ago, my overall wellness broke down in a big way, mentally especially. And to be able to find myself again, I had to break away from the business world and get reconnected spiritually, reconnected with my family, reconnected with myself physically, to be able to have the tools again to figure out what was really going on and what the issue was. And it was an identity. I started the business and started that part of my life to give back to my community, to the Indigenous community. And it became more about, what some other drivers are in typical business, which is revenue and eccentric success instead of internal success, which was the success of making the community successful. So complete reset to find my identity again. And if you have that moment where you need to step back. Somebody gets stressed out and they have a heart attack. You look at the individual and it's very evident that they had a heart attack, stress on the heart. They're probably, are they going to be stronger again, or physically, will you be back at the same capacity? I think it's definitely an opportunity to do that. You have a check that your body has told you that you need to reset. For me, mentally, I stress got to a point where when you need to reset. You can't process, you can't look at things clearly. You're not making the right decisions. You're not taking care of yourself physically. You're disconnected in all parts of your life. And when you look at, for me, to redefine the word stress, it became clear that stress is this big word. It's almost impossible to define it. To me, stress became fear. It was, what am I afraid of? And once I was able to unpack that, what's fear? And then most of fear is not reality. It's things that are not real. And if you can uncouple that and you control those fears, and you can build up your toolbox, your physical toolbox, your emotional toolbox, to be able to look at those things clearly and take it on and really get control of things that you can control. You can't live in the future, and you can't control things that are literally the dichotomy of the control. It's a silver bullet to take that stress and evaporate it, for lack of a better word. And
there's a couple things I want to dig into there. One was you kind of lost your identity. So you grew up in what you call like more traditional ways. You launched into a business world, had a very successful career building massive infrastructure projects. Did you feel like you were in between two worlds and you had to kind of I don't want to say get rid of your identity, but you at least put it to the side? Like, how did you negotiate that?
Yeah, it's an interesting, you got to look back a ways to, try to uncouple that. You negotiate it by not dealing with it. You just park one identity. You try to form a new identity.
And were you embarrassed? Or was there racism? Was there stigma? Like, what was the thing? Like I think of part of my identity as being from small town Saskatchewan. And I know that actually being in Calgary, that's a celebrated thing, right? Oh, you have that like farm boy ethic, and you'll get whatever, and you'll take risks, and you'll do what it takes. I couldn't imagine what it's like getting into an entrepreneurial field, carrying around something that isn't seen as something that's strong and get it done, kind of like. So was there stigma? Was there racism? Is that maybe why you kind of put it to the side?
Yeah, I think, when you come from a small community, and the region where I come from was a very unique culture as far as Inuit, Indigenous, non-Indigenous, all molded together under this unique region of Canada. And, we come from small communities. So the first wave of that, when you leave the community and you go to finish your high school or you go to post-secondary, you think back, generations, you think back 35 years ago, every joke is about, Indigenous,
Yeah.
somebody with an accent. So it's a different world. There was just, it's really, really different. So you close down immediately and you don't focus on that part of who you are. You're trying to understand the individuals that you're dealing with right now that, are on the sports teams or whatever when you're in school. And you're trying to mold to them. You're trying to be more like them. And you learn that pretty quickly if you want to survive. If you don't, then you don't work in that environment. You get shoved back to the small community.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's comfortable. Or you go out into environments with the workforce that are all from your community. So you're then going into the trades and going into trades mostly. And keep in mind, back at 35 years ago, you're into the trades with all the individuals from your area, from your hometown, because it's comfortable, it's safe.
Okay.
For me, in that environment, I think in some ways I got lucky. I found football, got involved in the football community, found a new group of friends that didn't really look at that. They just cared if you worked hard and you focused in on the football. That got me to a certain point, and it made me comfortable in some of those environments. And then from there, I ventured out and came out west. And when I came out west at the beginning, I ended up going to the north into the Yukon for a lot of reasons, for family and being comfortable in that environment. And my journey allowed me to get some really unique opportunities on projects, and one project led to the next project and the next project. And then all of a sudden you're 10 years later and you have a resume of projects that is defining you, not necessarily your culture or the community you're from. But you get caught up in that. And all of a sudden, you're 20 years later and all of a sudden you've lost who you are. What are you? Where are you from? What's your roots? And when you disconnect yourself from that, there's some point in your life when something happens, and for me it was loss of my best friend in a tragic accident. You really have no foundation to lean in on, and it's an interesting journey.
That's the interesting thing. Like, that's very corporate America, corporate North America, right? Is you become the stuff you've done, right? You become your projects, your net worth, your resume. Like, you literally send the resume and that's who you are. And what I hear you saying is if and this tracks for me, is if you have a tragedy, that resume goes out the window pretty quickly, and you don't know who you are. You don't know where you came from. If you haven't kept up with maintaining that part of yourself, you can spiral into crisis very quickly. And it sounds like that's something that happened to you.
For sure, yeah. And then you disconnect yourself from that world, from your community, and whenever, even in recent years, when I decided to do some things business-wise or different things business-wise, it's interesting when you look around. Who's there to support you when you have an event like a trauma, or you could have a trauma in person, you could have a business trauma. You go build a business and you put your heart and soul into it and it's your identity. And all of a sudden you change that business because of other influences and other identities. And all of a sudden things break down and you realize the reason why I did this was for me and for my family. The reason why I took a different direction was for others and their drivers. And when you're left looking through the lens of needing support or looking for support, what's usually left is you and your family.
Yeah.
And the rest is focus on what they're going to focus on. And that's a reminder. Like, it's a reminder that I do some mentorship with some youth, Indigenous youth, and I asked them a question. And the question is, what do you care about most in life? What do you care about most in life? And truly got to answer that. You got to go through the exercise of answering that. Yeah, you care about your family, you say all that, but what do you truly care about? And if it comes to the realization that you care about yourself, is number one, you have to care about yourself first. Most people don't put in that effort to truly care about themselves. There's an excuse not to go to the gym, not to eat healthy. But if you truly care about yourself, then you really got to think about how you ensure that your physical health is number one, your mental health is number one, your emotional and your spiritual. Okay, so it takes a lot of effort to do that. And you really got to do that. And you can't let others take that away from you. But we do that. We feel if we're in such a good place that it's easy to take away from ourselves and give back to others and give too much to the other side in detriment to our own health, to our own time. And once you're done looking through the lens of you, what's next? What's the next thing you care about? And you're looking at your spouse, you're looking at to the individuals right next to you. And guess who's the first people that we decide not to focus on? Especially as we get busier and we get success, define success. We're easy to look at our business partners. We're able to look at our board. We're able to look at everybody, other relationship, because they are we need them to make the next steps, whatever that success means. But the number one individual in person is that spouse, is that partner is next to you. It doesn't matter who comes in and out of your life. The kids come in your life and they're part of your family. They leave. What's left is you and the spouse. And that connection with that partner is so important. You need that to be able to strong as an individual. And then together you can look outward and you can take on business. You can take on family. You can take on a group of friends and relationships. But it amazes me now is that we go through life and we put all this other, we think opinions and we think the importance of relationships of all these others are the most important. And drivers of life convinces us of that. Successes, defining success convinces us of that. But it's a nice feeling when you're able to get to a point to realize that it's you, your partner, that take on the world.
Do you, Trent, have you had a, I don't quite know how to ask this, but it feels like there's a tension between like, and I might be off on this, so just work through it with me. There's like a tension between capitalism, economic growth, do everything at all costs, like wear a power suit, and Indigenous ways of knowing, being, living, promoting relationships, promoting health, promoting connection to the land. Those two things seem to almost be the opposite, and it presents itself in so many ways, like approval of mega projects is one example of like, there's always this tension in the news. Like there's an Indigenous group that really wants to preserve the land. And then there's this like oil company that wants to dig it up and turn it into profit. Like, and you've navigated both of those worlds and you're still learning and figuring it out. Is that tension real, or did we just make that up?
Oh, it's real for sure. Is it consistent? And it is so black and white where it's like Indigenous, corporate, one side versus the other. No, it's a lot more complicated than that. Whether it's Indigenous or people that respect, their land and their environment, and how they behave and how they approach a project or a progress versus how others approach it. I've worked with a lot of great people over the years, and I work with an amazing group, an amazing man, Brian Serraris up in the north. He's a rancher. He has a lot of land. You want to see an individual, and not only Brian, but anyone that owns beautiful land, thousands and thousands of acres, that some company wants to put a pipeline across their land. How they're going to react. They're going to yeah, no problem, just come and pop the pipeline. No, they're going to be extremely protective of that land and ensure that it's pristine. All the effort whether it's financially they bought it, whether it's passed down generations, mm-hmm. They are going to look at that land and protect it like you wouldn't believe. You look at some of the parts in Eastern Canada, whether it's Indigenous land or non-Indigenous lands, it's immaculate countryside. And you wonder why they don't want a pipeline through that land. It's their land. It's pristine. It's generation after generation that's lived on that land, protected on that land. You look through the lens of the Indigenous, it's not only generations or generations as a couple families in a couple hundred years, it's thousands of years of taking care of the land. And who else does it? Is it the government supposed to be responsible for that? No. Is it industry consistently? No. So Indigenous individuals feel an inherent right, and is an inherent right, to protect the land. And it goes back to our spiritual connection with the land and the animals. It's not, it's like protecting your brother, your sister, your mother. It's protecting your family. And if you look through that lens and you don't look at it through the immediate transactional lens of this is a project, this is for a short-term gain. If you can personalize it and you look through your personal life and how you would make decisions to protect you, your family, and what you own. Now take that at a grander scale and then try to connect that and see why it's filled with emotion and passion as far as the Indigenous folks and how they want to ensure that major projects and major development, I should say, in Canada is done the right way and is not done off a driver of profit. It's done off a driver of all these other governance factors that need to be part of the table. And that's, when you say governance to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, it means something. And it doesn't necessarily mean the same thing as it does to corporate Canada and vice versa, right? But understanding that linkage between the governance piece of Indigenous people, which is taking the land, is taking our culture, is taking the social aspects, is taking also the economics, the self-determination, which all Indigenous people, all nations and communities are looking for, is through self-reliance, being independent. No one wants to be being successful or being here because the government is supporting the nation. That's, that's working toward poverty. We want to be self-reliant. And how do you do that? Well, you need to drive the economies, but it needs to be done in a sustainable way, in the right way. And the way you're going to do that is ensuring that Indigenous voices and governance are at the table, not through some imposed timeline that the government or industry puts forward. But in the minute there's an idea and a concept of development in any given region, so the Indigenous folks are there to lead that dialogue and ensure that the governance and the way to go about that development is done the right way. And if that happens, then it's not about if a project is going to get opposed or not opposed. It's about everyone a part of that project agreeing and knowing that it's going to be the right thing for the region, for Canada, for the nations, and all parties involved. But I think our history has shown that it's all about being reactive, and the most important group is the last group to come to the table, which doesn't make sense.
That makes total sense, Trent. I love how you articulated that. And I hadn't really thought about it like that, especially how protective we are of our property and the things we own and how immaculate that land is and how the stakeholders need to be involved at the very beginning. And I just wonder if that same ethos, protecting what we have, is extended to the mental health piece too, because we talked about how there's like this tension between capitalism and corporate North America, and sometimes Indigenous ways of knowing and being. And on a personal level, those two things sometimes clash because in large part, we sacrifice to make profit and like sacrifice to build businesses and like I talk about burnout all the time. Burnout is literally saying to your like soul and your emotional self, I don't care what you're saying right now. I have to work. And it appears that like an Indigenous way of reacting to that is like protect yourself and take care of yourself first because you need to be there for your community. And I wonder if we can integrate more of that into some of our wellness, the things that we teach around wellness and how we promote wellness in the workplace are these really core Indigenous concepts about wellness, which is like take care of yourself because you need to be there and you need to protect what you have because you're not just yourself, you're part of generations of people, thousands of years of people.
Yeah, you look at, and this is I think some of the struggles from Indigenous people or some of the struggles from businesses being able to incorporate Indigenous people into their businesses and different levels of roles and so on and so forth, is because, if we have a year calendar and we have ceremonies and we have family events and community events that are extremely, extremely, extremely important to the community, to our families, to us, to be able to keep our identity into our cultures. And they're all different. All the First Nations are different, and Métis are different, and Inuit are different. But then in itself, that is extremely important. And businesses now to be able to adjust their overall calendars and their work weeks and their work months to be able to incorporate the time that's required for that individual to keep his identity, in turn be able to give back to their family and give back in a positive way into the businesses as well, if they embrace that, if they embrace those cultures. Versus, if there's things that we need to deal with family as far as losses, we go about that totally different. And we need more time. We need more time to heal ourselves. We need more time to support our families and our communities. And for businesses to understand that, it's difficult. Now also, it's even more difficult for Indigenous individuals that want to take on more. They want to take on more inside those given businesses or more inside of what they want to do as an entrepreneur. And they're competing against individuals that their culture is to work 80 hours a week, to work 8 days out of, create an extra day in a week, just to go, put in hours to get deliverables done, more so than how they go about getting those deliverables done and how they can sustain that way of doing business. And so through the Indigenous, and I personally had to learn that lesson and learn it the hard way. For my own well-being, to not work 6-7 days a week, to be able to work 4 days a week, to be able to work 8 hours a day instead of 16 hours a day. Those are learnings that I had to learn the hard way. And the only way I can do that was coming back through the lens of my culture and understanding why we can be successful or even more successful in doing things in a good way, and just believing that and trusting it and knowing it's not about a given week or a given quarter or a given year. It's about over our lifetime and what we give back over the lifetime.
And it's about sustainability, which is a core concept that you were talking about before. It's totally about sustainability, not short-term, quarterly based margins.
One of the key things I learned as far as strategy, and I feel, and individuals who know me, work with me, I believe I'm a very good strategist. For many years, I believe that strategy was being super intelligent, where you could figure out the future and be out of the future, and come to realize that nobody can figure out the future. You only can live in the moment, and if you're doing it right through the lens of core values and trusting the vision, the future will map out, the strategy will map out. But I've learned this from endless Indigenous leaders and chiefs and business individuals. The number one trait to strategy is patience. And that patience is what I think a lot of people see from Indigenous people, but don't see it as what it truly is, a powerful tool in strategy. They often see it as other traits and maybe other weaknesses, where it's our number one strategy to be able to be patient enough to think through things properly, to process it, to pause, let things unfold as they should and as they will in a good way.
I love that, Trent. I want to wrap up there, because I think that is a very powerful message, and it really ties in a lot of what we were trying to talk about, is those tensions between these, two different ways of thinking about it. And we can learn so much by joining those together. So I'm happy you're doing this work, man. And I think we learned a lot from hearing you speak about it. So thanks for coming on the podcast today to let us into that world. And we have a lot of, as you and I both know, we have a lot of work to do in this space. So let's keep going.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. Appreciate all you do and all that Headversity does. Anytime. Thank you very much.